Hello, I'm Amy Cook, the Deputy Medical Sciences Librarian at the Walton Library, and I work with the Medical Liaison team. The topic I'm talking about today is altmetrics, a different way of measuring research outputs. And please don't worry if you haven't heard of them before, or even if you have. We're going into a little bit more detail, and I'm hoping to convince you, along with my colleague Simon, that being active online and measuring outputs in different ways are an important part of your research career. Okay, so what are altmetrics and why do they matter? What you may have already heard of are what librarians and other people who measure research outputs refer to as bibliometrics, or perhaps you've heard traditional metrics. Or you may not have heard of them referred to under any name at all, but you've probably come across some of these more traditional metrics. So we're thinking about things like, for example, citation counts. So if you've been looking at published articles, you'll notice that they often have, in their record view on different databases, they often have a number attached to them, and that indicates how many other papers on that database have cited this particular paper. So it gives you an idea of how influential a paper might be. You may have heard of your H-index. So an H-index is a personalised metric for researchers, and it attempts to measure your productivity and output against your citability or your influence. So every published author has an H-index. You may have also heard of the now dreaded journal impact factor, which attempted to give journals a ranking as to their importance. Research communities are now shying away much more from using journal impact factors as a measure of individual articles' significance, but again, it's something else that you may have come across. And what all of these traditional types of metrics have in common is that they're based on traditional academic ways of measuring outputs and research. So they rely on published articles and other types of research output, and they will give you concrete figures. And I would say concrete objective figures, but we would also, librarians, that is the royal we, would caution against relying too heavily on metrics, particularly any one single metric. They give you an overview or a sort of thumbnail of how particular authors or papers or journals contribute to the research landscape. So by contrast, altmetrics, so alternative metrics, altmetrics, focus on a different type of attention or a different type of sharing and collaborating. And that's largely online sharing and attention. So that could be things like article downloads, whether that's views of a PDF or views of a record level on a database, or perhaps even a download into a reference manager like EndNote or Mendeley, if you've heard of those types of programs. It could be a mention on a blog post, so if your work's being discussed by a blogger. It could be mentions on Twitter, could be mentions in the media, particularly if perhaps an output has been referred to by an MP, perhaps, thinking about policy, or perhaps it's come up in debates around clinical practice, that kind of thing. So it's a wide range of different types of discussion and online mention, but it does differ from a more traditional metric in that a lot of the data is pulled from online resources. And so if we think about this in a bit more detail, why would those kinds of metrics be valuable to us or to researchers in the 21st century? How can they help, or what can they add to your view of your work and the work of others as well? So essentially, a few arguments in favour of altmetrics. They help you as a researcher understand how your outputs are being discussed, shared, commented on, referred to in the online community. And because of that, it's a much more current, much more immediate feedback loop than you would have to wait for if you were waiting for those more traditional types of metrics like citation counts. Particularly with those traditional forms of metrics, they can take several years to really begin to show the impact that any one piece of work is having. In fact, there was a survey several years ago now, before the original implementation of REF, that suggested that it can take up to about 7 years for the full impact of any one piece of work to really come to light. And it's not really surprising when you consider the long process that any published piece of work has to go through to be influential or useful. I mean, you have to submit your article, it has to be accepted first of all by publication, it has to go through the process of peer review, it has to be published and then read and digested by the research community, and then they have to start working on their own pieces of publication output, lab experiments, or whatever it is that your work helps to influence. And all of this takes an awful lot of time. Whereas if people are reading your work and perhaps merely commenting on it or reflecting on it online before they've had a chance to incorporate it into their own research and their own work, that is a much faster, much more immediate process. And so the suggestion here is that perhaps altmetrics aren't looking to replace or overtake traditional metrics at all. Perhaps they're there to complement those more established measures of research output. So perhaps they're there in addition to, not instead of. Other reasons that altmetrics can be really useful for you as an individual researcher: they can help you benchmark the most useful channels or groups or areas for you to actually be promoting your work to, particularly against peers in your field. So if you know that there are a few other up-and-coming postdocs who are demonstrating their work or sharing their work with particular research communities or collabs or that kind of thing in different parts of the world, if you notice that they're getting attention from those particular areas, that suggests it might be a useful place for you to also disseminate your own work and share your own work online. And so if you follow that to its natural conclusion, you should therefore be able to better promote and encourage, if we're talking about massaging the statistics and things, and that's not being cynical at all. I'm not suggesting here that we try and artificially inflate our own influence or figures, but it does stand to reason that where things are being measured, you look to promote and market yourself in the best way possible. That's part of the job. Part of your role is to manage your profile and promote yourself to the people who are most likely to use your work to its fullest. So once you have all of this information, that much more immediate feedback on where might be best for your work and who's most interested in it, then you can consider your own online promotion and activity much more carefully, and in turn help promote yourself and your work in the future. So hopefully I've given you a bit of food for thought on why altmetrics are important alongside their more traditional counterparts, countermetrics as it were. Just to give you a bit of an introduction to the most common platforms or types of altmetric that you might see in use. You might have seen it already. There are two main contenders that we refer to. So the first would be Plum Analytics, and you can see I've got a little capture on screen here, a little demo of what that looks like. So Plum Analytics use this little sort of cellular cluster, little amoeba type cluster with different coloured nodules, and those different coloured nodules represent different types of use or capture or collaboration. So that can include views at the record level in different databases. It can include exports to different types of software, so we've already mentioned Mendeley, EndNote, that kind of thing. It can also refer to social media likes and shares, mentions in news articles, that kind of thing, and then also citations, and we've mentioned the implication for clinical practice and for policy making as well. So it helps capture all of those different types of activity. Now, you may have come across Plum Analytics in various different, significant online databases. EBSCO have embedded Plum Analytics in the past, and I think currently continue to do so. Science Direct and Scopus as well. And I've got a little screen capture here of a record level, and you can see on the right-hand side you've got those traditional metrics, so citations in Scopus and field-weighted citation, and then you've also got the Plum Analytics icon underneath. And if we click into that, and I'll show you that live in just a second, then we can see the level of detail that you can access from these platforms. Okay, so we're now in the Scopus platform, and here's one carefully chosen article that I've pre-selected because I know it has a record with Plum Analytics attached. So in this record level you can see those traditional metrics that I mentioned, and then also the icon for Plum Analytics. So if I click on that icon, that should take us through to a higher range of detail here. I'm going to tab down the page till we get to the Plum Analytics section, and here we can see a higher level of detail on those numbers in terms of captures, downloads, usage, mentions on blogs and in Twitter as well. And if we click on one of those hyperlink figures, it'll take us through to a dashboard where we can see a bit more information, including some of those tweets, including some of those mentions. So you can see there's quite a lot of detail here that we can capture just from accessing those figures and that information. And the second brand of altmetrics to mention is, funnily enough, Altmetrics. And one of the places that you may have more obviously seen this in use is actually in Newcastle's ePrints repository. And you'll be able to tell this one apart from Plum Metrics because the visual icons look very different. This uses an altmetric donut, for want of a better word. And again, it's color-coded to indicate what kind of attention or what kind of altmetric we're looking at. And so again, if I go back to the native platform with a title that I've chosen carefully beforehand, we can see that there are more details available to you through the Altmetrics platform. So I'm going to click on that so we can see what kind of detail is available to us here. And again, you've got quite a rich level of detail here that you can mine and use to your advantage. So you've even got information such as Twitter demographics, so where in the world are people tweeting about your work. You can see the breakdown of different countries and what type of professional community they work in. You also get a bit of context here as well to help put that score into perspective so that you can see how this work compares to others in the discipline or in the general research community. So again, giving you a little bit more information so that you can identify how and where and when your work is most likely to be shared. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour through metrics, both traditional and alternative, and why altmetrics might be or should be important to you as a 21st century researcher. Your next step is to start thinking about your online presence and online profile. So that's both where to collect information and also how to manage the information that is available about you. You can see other videos from my colleague Simon on your online presence and interactions, and there's another video from myself on a few admin tips around housekeeping for your online research profiles.